Germany's Social Democrats appear to have pulled off a narrow win over the far right in the regional election in the state of Brandenburg. Polls ahead of the vote had the far right Alternative for Germany ahead, but preliminary results put the incumbent SPD, that's the party of Chancellor Olaf Scholz, ahead by a narrow margin. Let's look at the results in detail. The latest projections put the centre-left Social Democrats on 30.7%, while the far-right AfD gets 29.4%. And that's a gain of almost 6 points since 2019. The Conservative CDU party is on 12.1%. The new leftist conservative Sahra Wagenknecht Alliance, or BSW, gets 13.4%. The Greens are on 4.2%. If that result stands, it means the Green Party, which is currently part of Brandenburg's coalition government, has dropped below the 5% threshold required to enter the state parliament. And even with a second-place finish, the AfD gains were significant, and they add to a good showing in 2 other regional elections this month. But for the Social Democrats, the result gives cause for cautious optimism. Still, their lead candidate, the incumbent state premier Dietmar Woidke, warned that the threat of the far-right AfD remains a challenge.
If an openly, in large parts and in its entirety, right-wing extremist party can achieve around 30% of the vote in our state, that is a huge alarm signal for all of us, for all Democrats, for all those who stand for freedom, openness and tolerance. We must also take this seriously despite all the pride we have today in a good result, and we must continue this debate intensively after the election campaign. Brandenburg only has a chance if it remains an open and tolerant state. That is the challenge we face after the election, just as before the election.
Nach der Wahl ist vor der Wahl. Herzlichen Dank an euch alle heute. Einen schönen Abend.
DW's chief political correspondent Nina Hase is outside the state parliament, a building in Brandenburg's capital Potsdam near Berlin, following those results coming in. Nina, the Social Democrats, that's Chancellor Olaf Scholz's party, is in the lead by current projections, but that was a bit of a surprise, was it not?
Well, it was a surprise, definitely, because pre-election polls had actually seen the far-right AfD on top. So Dietmar Woidke, the incumbent state premier, managed to mobilize a lot of voters. And that's what the figures are suggesting, that he also got a lot of support from other Democratic Party supporters who wanted, by all means, to prevent an AfD victory here. So this is something where we've seen a lot of tactical voting in the region of Brandenburg, because many people were driven by the fear that the AfD might take away yet another victory in a regional election, like we saw a couple of weeks ago in another regional election in the former communist east of the country. So this was something that mobilized voters. And you also have to add that Dietmar Woidke, the incumbent state premier, won not because he's a member of the same party as the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, but in spite of that. Voters were very clear that Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor, is very unpopular. He was kept out of the election rally by the people here in the regional chapter of the SPD, and the incumbent state premier said that he wanted to keep people's trust and not be associated with the government in Berlin.
Now, the far-right populist AfD did very well. Why did they resonate with voters, especially with younger voters?
That is a trend that we have seen in previous elections, also this year in those other regional elections, but also in the European elections, that the AfD managed to mobilize young voters in particular. And Dietmar Woidke, again, the same person, the incumbent state premier, actually said tonight that the AfD are very active and they are very successful when it comes to social media. So they produce videos that then end up going viral. And that is, of course, something where the other Democratic democratic parties have given them a head start, and so far they haven't managed to catch up with them. Now, maybe this is because the more democratic, more traditional parties always stress the fact that politics is complex and that no easy solutions can be found. But definitely this is also something that people in Berlin will have to assess very, very thoroughly. If they want to reach young voters, they'll have to work on their social media strategy.
Now, another surprise tonight is the Green Party. They are currently part of the coalition there in Brandenburg. But as it stands, they might be out. What does that mean?
Yeah, at the moment it looks as though the Greens will get some, or will have got some 4%, 4.2%, if those figures are confirmed, of votes. And that means that they won't manage to get past that 5% threshold that you need to be represented in Parliament here. For a while it looked as though they could get in via a special regional clause here, that if one direct candidate would have got the seat straight away, they would have made it into Parliament anyway. At the moment it doesn't look like that. And of course, the FDP didn't even feature. So the business-friendly FDP, that is the third partner in this coalition government in Berlin, they appeared under other parties in those election results. So this is again proof of just how unpopular the current government in Berlin is, because people used this election as well to reflect that they are unhappy with how Olaf Scholz is running the government in Berlin, and that there's a lot of issues when it comes to infighting that is not very popular with voters at all. Parties, the Greens and the FDP in particular, seem to be blocking each other at the federal level. So this is also reflected in these regional election results.
Do you think that's one of the reasons for the very good voter turnout this year?
Voter turnout was very high, and this is largely due to the fact that Dietmar Woidke, the incumbent state premier, managed this horse race quite successfully. I've said it already that it looked as though the AfD might take away that victory, but when you look at what drove voters to the ballot boxes, it was very clear that this election rally was really about fear. So on the one side, the AfD stressed the fact that you need to be afraid of all those immigrants coming into the country, of criminal foreigners in the country committing crimes. And on the other side, you've got all these more democratic parties and their voters who are extremely afraid that far-right parties, right-wing extremists, some of them, might actually see themselves on a trend where they're unstoppable and where they might actually have an impact at the federal level.
DW's chief political correspondent Nina Hase there, reporting from Potsdam. Thank you, Nina. Well, more on the national implications now with our chief political editor Michaela Küfner, who is traveling with the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, who is in New York ahead of next week's United Nations General Assembly. Michaela, do you think this result will help boost Olaf Scholz's popularity?
Absolutely not. His party may have won, but the man who almost single-handedly won these elections in the name of the same party, the Social Democrats, Dietmar Woidke, didn't want to be on the same poster, and he didn't want Olaf Scholz's support on stage. That's how he managed to beat the far-right AfD into second place. And this is going to raise some questions over Olaf Scholz's leadership, with him, of course, nationally already seeing the lowest popularity ratings on record in Germany.
Now, Michaela, hang on. We will come back to you because, as we've just heard, Olaf Scholz is in New York ahead of next week's UN General Assembly. And earlier, world leaders adopted what the UN calls the Pact for the Future. Scholz said it would create more trust in the United Nations. The Pact tackles challenges such as war or climate change. It also calls for an adjustment of the international financial system in favor of the global South. And it aims to lay the grounds for a global regulation of artificial intelligence. The pact was negotiated under the leadership of Germany and Namibia. Here's what Scholz had to say about it.
I'm very glad that Germany was able, together with Namibia, to facilitate this process. We worked very hard during the nearly 2 years that are behind us, and I'm very convinced that the reached consensus is the basis for the necessary progress within the United Nations, but also in our world, where the cooperation and multilateralism are the key instrument for getting to a better future. I think every country was at the table when we had the discussions in the last time, and it is now clear that the states and countries of the world are willing to go into this direction, which is now the basis for our cooperation. And those who dissent in the end a bit will have to adjust.
Germany's Chancellor Olaf Scholz there speaking in New York. Michaela, Olaf Scholz is hailing this consensus as necessary progress. Are UN member states united in this assessment?
Yes and no. Overall, there's an overwhelming majority that was in favour, and really this is not a document that is going to change the world as we know it, but what it is living proof that the United Nations can act together, that they can move beyond the day-to-day, week-to-week troubleshooting, putting out fires and addressing war. At the same time, there are people, there are countries, namely particularly Russia, who are or don't seem to be interested anymore in any kind of consensus, a formal consensus. And here we saw the countries actually working together for the greater good score a point. The multilateralism did manage to hold Russia at bay, which tried to derail the process today on these final moments just before a consensus was due to be found. Then there was a vote on whether to push back on Russia, and particularly African nations, the African Union represented by the Democratic Republic of Congo, unusually did not abstain itself. In fact, it spoke out in favor of reaching an international consensus. So that's a look at behind the doors diplomacy behind me in the United Nations building. But it did prove today that the UN is still striving for being united, certainly the vast majority, and that there may be even bigger issues like climate change and sustainable development, but particularly those small countries who often feel powerless are keen to get those addressed and to have more of an equal say and a seat at the table when it comes to international banking, resources, and making their countries fit for the future. So here, Germany and Namibia, also in the past, Germany, a colonial power, a force, in Namibia managed to get their act together, and that is 1 point scored for working together.
DW's chief political editor, Michaela Küfner, there reporting from New York. Thank you very much, Michaela.